And a warm welcome for everyone joining me today. I wanted to make a quick video regarding the Taylor Rule, which was named after Stanford economist John Taylor, who outlined a rule in his study Discretion versus Policy Rules in Practice. And Taylor continued to perfect the rule and made amendments to the formula in 1999. We wanted to go through the general rule as you're currently hearing in the press and from the Fed directly talk about raising interest rates, raising the Fed funds rates, and I wanted to give some academic background to what's been going on behind the scenes and how they've been following the Taylor rule in general. So let's move on. In general, the Taylor rule, in descriptive terms, looks at the nominal Fed funds target rate, and you determine that target rate by looking at inflation plus the real equilibrium of the Fed funds rate plus 1/2 of the inflation gap plus 1/2 of the output gap. So we have an example down below, which you can see there, but I'm going to move to the next slide, which will give us where we're at currently, at least through the end of the fourth quarter of 2021. Where are we now? The Taylor rule through the fourth quarter of 2021 is showing that we should be at 9% Fed funds rate. So the Fed, by this measure, the Fed is at the very, very beginning of its interest rate rise, of its increasing interest rates for the Fed funds. So there's a long ways to go. Now the Taylor rule, as you can see from the blue line, it does move around quite a bit. There's some volatility because there are 4 different moving parts. And so there are going to be quite a few moving parts depending on where inflation's at, depending on where GDP is at. So keep that in mind. But as of the end of fourth quarter, we were at 9%, which is where the Fed should have been. Obviously, they were at basically 1/4%, a long way to go. This takes a look at the differential of what the actual Fed funds rates are versus what the Taylor rule would recommend that they be at. And you can see that we have a long ways to go. Historically speaking, we are the furthest off that we have been since 1960. So the Fed is clearly behind the yield, clearly behind the curve, and we're at a very early stage in their interest rate rise cycle. Here's a look at where we are currently with the real and potential GDP, looking at the GDP gap. Go to the next slide. Here's the output gap. You can see we're just a smidge below the 100% line. Moving on, we're looking at the U.S. Potential real GDP. What's really concerning, quite honestly, is looking at how real GDP and potential real GDP has really flattened since 2010. We're in a very low growth cycle that we're in. Is it policy related? Yeah, probably. But there are other factors as well. But it is something to note. And then we've got the real versus potential GDP. You can see those figures here. Again, it's somewhat volatile, but if you mix that with the current Atlanta Fed GDP estimate for Q1, which is at approximately 1% right now, we can see the economy is beginning to slow. With that slowing economy, by the way, we are going to see the Taylor rule Fed funds target coming down. Now, is that going to be offset by inflation? We'll see. That'll be soon enough. And then going on to some of these components, resource utilization and the output gap. And then finally going to figure 7 and then figure 8. Looking at the various components of the utilization rate. This all coming from Dr. Edward Yardini. So I wanted to thank him very, very much. What it really shows, in conclusion, is we are faced with quite a sizable hiking phase for interest rates and the Fed funds. And I think the markets are reflecting that right now, the realization that we're going to be going through higher interest rates over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So that's about it for now. I just wanted to give you a quick taste of the Taylor rule and where we're at now. And I thank you for joining me.